Rockaways Productions presents The Casey Waters Show, Episode 514, The Rescue Agent. Hello, I'm your host, Casey Waters. Today, I'm sitting in the cat claw chair. Squeaks, my cat, loves to go up along the top of the chair and sharpen her claws there, ripping the faux leather. There's all these little holes in it. Oh well. Then, off to my left, probably just out of camera range, is the finch cage. So we might hear some occasional finch noises, especially since there's a new baby in there. Well, the baby's growing up, starting to grow feathers. So, tonight I will continue with My Big Toe by Thomas Campbell. Here, the author looks at the nature of reality and consciousness. Then, it's on to The Rescue Agent. Here, I also look at the nature of reality and consciousness, but also introduce the element of the imaginary territories and when help might be on the way. Today's show will feature background footage from Strawberry Gap Trail. To get there from Asheville, North Carolina, take 74A East. Go through Fairview and continue past Fairview on up the mountain. When you get to the top of the pass, you'll cross into Henderson County. Shortly thereafter, maybe a couple hundred yards or less, take the first right turn. It is a dirt parking lot. The trailhead is there. If you go up the trail, you'll come to a nice peak with views of Fairview. I went there and continued on a little bit further, but I didn't make it all the way to Blue Ridge Meadows, where the trail ends. So, now, let's continue with My Big Toe by Thomas Campbell. Others can access your data, every intention, feeling, or thought you have ever had. But there are rules, and only those who have learned how can do so with full awareness. It is not likely that this information will be used for anything other than to help you grow up. However, if you break a rule or get pulled in before a judge, every detail will be scanned to determine the truth of the matter. It is impossible to hide or bluff. Everything is there. Everything. Yes, even that. Now, let's go to page 708 of My Big Toe by Thomas Campbell. Back to work. A projection of a fragment of your sentient consciousness into a space-time reality could get spiritually dead-ended in a situation where you believe that you do not have significant choices left. You feel that you cannot produce uniquely useful or significant choices during future increments of delta t. Under those conditions, your inability to find a way out of the perceived dead end will typically cause you to find a way, perhaps a fatal disease or accident, to check out of or shed that particular reality. Though most humans do not check out because of being dead-ended, a significant minority do. There are usually many ways out of an imagined dead end. Many good choices, other than the termination of the experience packet, are typically available, but they remain invisible to a self-referential consciousness limited by belief, fear, and ego. Now, let's go to page 714. Because our future is both dynamic, updated every delta t, and statistical, it exists only as a set of uncertain probable realities. Consequently, it has a fundamentally different nature than our past, which is a set of stored reality system state vectors that were actualized by the beings, objects, and energy of OS. Although many future events are accurately predictable, which is the basis for precognition, because of high expectation values, they have not yet been actualized or chosen into the OS present, and things can and do change. This is why Eastern traditions talk only about past lives and not future lives, and why karma is attached only to past events and situations, not future ones. We have not yet actualized our future. It could turn out to be any one of a large set of possibilities, some being more likely than others. We turn the probable future into our present by making our collective choices and thus removing all uncertainty. The probable future is ours to pursue within limits set for our own good. An individual, a group, or an event can have its future probability reality surface calculated. It simply depends on how you want to filter or query the probable future database and whether the circumstances support your being granted access to the data. Access must be both earned by you and granted by the system administrator. Having someone else retrieve the data for you will not get you around the access problem. Access is granted by the system administrator based on the probable use of the data, not on who retrieves it. There is no way to cheat, trick, or force the system into providing information that will not produce a positive spiritual benefit for all who might be affected by it. One can modify the probable future surface with focused intent, thereby raising or lowering the expectation value of a future possibility. With a properly focused mind, new peaks can sometimes appear and others of long standing may slowly disappear from the probable reality surface representing a given entity. This is generally how the mind utilizes non-physical mental energy to manipulate future events within PMR without violating the psi uncertainty principle. The psi uncertainty principle tells us that fuzzy short peaks are easier too modified than tall, sharp ones, and that events become increasingly more and more difficult to manipulate the closer they get to the present. Now it is time for the rescue agent. Well, is help on the way? Well, sometimes it is. Unfortunately, the rescue agent may seem, well, unreliable at times. Other times, perhaps extremely reliable. So it's hard to predict if we're really going to get rescued, but often we do. So there's a rescue agent out there somewhere. Well, this rescue agent lies beyond our realm of existence, or perhaps is superimposed on our realm of existence. Perhaps that might be a more accurate way to explain it, but we don't tap into this other realm readily. But it is there, the next higher level of consciousness. The author in My Big Toe, Thomas Campbell, refers to this as NPMR, non-physical matter reality, as opposed to PMR, physical matter reality, where we all reside. So this NPMR, this non-physical matter reality, might contain the imaginary territories I often refer to. So, it's going to take us a little bit to get to the rescue agent because we have to lay the groundwork of reality, at least to some degree, and kind of set the stage, so to speak. So it will seem more logical that a rescue agent might be lurking somewhere in the shadows, so to speak. Well, first of all, we got to get a handle on reality. Well, a good way to do it is an old physics experiment. You have a light source, and then you have near it, or perhaps a few feet away or 10 feet away or whatever, at some point you have a barrier, like a wall or something. And then you have two narrow slits cut into it, perhaps an inch apart or so. Maybe if the light source is 5 feet away. I'm just guessing on this. It might not matter much anyway. But what happens? Well, you shine the light source on the slits, and you'll see a diffraction pattern form behind the slits. So in other words, you have a wall with two slits in them, but then perhaps a couple feet beyond that or so, you have another wall. And I guess maybe a dark wall would work well for the furthest wall back where the light is actually captured. So the light goes through the first wall with the two slits. Well, that could be a white wall. But then the next wall behind it, well, should be dark. And so thus you could see what results from the lights going through the slits. So the light goes through the slits and forms a diffraction pattern, a pattern of alternating light and dark bands. Well, if you think of light as a wave, this makes perfect sense. The wave of light hits the two slits, and then a diffraction pattern forms, with areas of resonance where the light will be brighter, and where areas where the two waves of light, in a sense, will cancel each other out and leave darkness. So we have these bands of light. So I guess when I say cancel each other out, I guess if you have a light wave and from one slit and the peak of the wave hits the wall, and at the same time the light from the other slit, the trough, hits the wall, the low point, well then these kind of cancel each other out and you get darkness. However, if the peaks coincide and you have the two peaks lining up perfectly, or the two troughs lining up perfectly, well, you'll get light. You'll get a band of light. So you have light, dark, these bands of light. Okay, well, that's all fine and dandy. Light is a wave. Whatever. Well, sometimes it's a particle, Well, here we go. Now we're going to get a machine that could fire photons, literally one at a time. And we fire them at this barrier. Well, guess what? You would think that each photon, one at a time, well, half of them would go through one slit and half of them would go through another, and you would have two bands of light, one for each slit. I mean, at shooting one photon at a time, how could it possibly interfere with itself and create a diffraction pattern? Whoops, that's what happened. Yeah, so now things are getting a little bizarre. Even one photon at a time hitting this wall with two slits in it, it will form a diffraction pattern. It almost seems impossible. How can a single photon interfere with itself? But somehow it seems to do just that. Okay, now let's bring in the measurement paradox. Here's where things get interesting. Now we're going to put a detector on each slit, so we'll know which slit the photon goes through. We'll be able to actually measure it. Well, in theory, the photon half the time should go through one slit and half the time through another. So you should have about the same number of clicks or number of photons for each slit. Well, in theory. So fire away. We fire these photons one at a time. And we could even allow time between them, 5 seconds or 10 seconds, maybe even longer. But anyway, you keep firing these photons away, and eventually, well, you don't get a diffraction pattern. Now that you're measuring which slit the photon goes through, you get two lines, just like you expected all along. What does this mean? Well, it might mean quite a lot, actually, because what it is the measuring of the photon, which slit it goes through, apparently fixed the photon and made it go through one or the other, and thus you have two bands of light. However, if you don't measure the photon, you don't know which slit it goes through, you let it remain a mystery, well, then you get the diffraction pattern. So you measure the photon, which slit it goes through, you get two bands. You don't measure, you get a diffraction pattern. Well, what does that say about reality? Well, perhaps reality is really a quantum blur. Perhaps all that's around us, all the matter, cars, people, mountains, trees, Even the stars and the moon might be all a quantum blur. Kind of like waves of energy, but not defined in a single place and not readily observable until we decide to observe it. Then suddenly the quantum waves, the quantum blur, so to speak, focuses, and the waves kind of condense, coalesce into matter in a well-defined position. Of course, it could be matter in motion, obviously, in which the position is changing, but still well-defined. Position, velocity, and so on. And of course, if you measure a photon's velocity, well, it's harder to nail down its position. If you measure its position, it's harder to nail down its velocity. But anyway, what we're really focused is on the first experiment, the double slit experiment. So if we measure the photons, we get two slits, two bands of light rather. If we don't measure the photons as they go through the slit, we get a diffraction pattern. So perhaps that's what reality is, a diffraction pattern. But once we observe it, it condenses into matter. So, in a sense, consciousness is primary. Well, that's what Thomas Campbell asserts in My Big Toe. When we observe everything, it coalesces into our physical matter reality, and it has a rule set, a definition of rules, various physical laws, such as gravity. So, our consciousness is primary over matter. Our consciousness, in a sense, becomes before matter. And at higher levels of existence, well, those are levels of consciousness. Because consciousness is primary. Consciousness is the ultimate reality, not matter. I know this is hard to grasp, but there are more experiments that point to this. And a lot of physicists are in agreement with this idea, including Thomas Campbell, the author of My Big Toe, which I'll continue with probably on the next episode as well. I only have about 100 pages or less to go. It's a long book, maybe 800 or so pages long. Anyway, so let's move on. So we got trauma that happens to some people. And when I say trauma, I'm referring to extreme trauma, or trauma that happens on and off over a long period of time, perhaps many years, and perhaps a combination of both. Extreme trauma that happens occasionally over many years. Perhaps that's it. You got a lot of trauma, and it's happening over a long time. And it's kind of unpredictable. It just kind of happens. And it's pretty awful. It's happened to people. Sure. It happened to someone I know very well. Anyway, well, this person I know very well sometimes has psi phenomenon. They can meet someone and see into their past and describe unusual events that really did occur. Then they could see into the future occasionally and predict disasters such as 9/11 or Tropical Storm Helene. They or he, this is all one person I'm referring to, who's been through a lot of trauma, could see into the present and locate a missing cat in the woods over a large area of 4 acres or more. So seeing into the present, seeing into the future, seeing into someone else's past. Real psi phenomenon. I've seen this. I've seen my friend do this. Anyway, so this has been documented that a lot of people do who have psi phenomenon, such as telepathy or being a precognition or be able to see into someone's past without any information about it and other things. Well, these people who've been traumatized often have this phenomenon that occurs to them available, where people with less trauma have less of this phenomenon. So, what does it all mean? Well, perhaps there's a rescue agent out there. Now we're getting a little closer. Sure. This psi phenomenon happening to people who've been traumatized, people who perhaps need it the most. And it might not just be people who are traumatized. My intuition suggests that people who are isolated also probably have psi phenomenon more than most other people. And people in the distant past, when it was you and nature, and you had to know when the storm is coming, or you had to know where your loved ones are, even though you can't see them or communicate with them, and you don't know what their plans are, but somehow you have to know where they're at. And sometimes you do. Or at least that's my assumption. My assumption is for people in the distant past who didn't have much technology or no.
Casey Waters Show. Producer, Casey Waters. Graphic editing, Judson Laird. Please note our new email address, caseywaters2@caseywaters.com.